I have one question.
That's
It's about Zeitgeist Addendum. It might be a Peter Joseph's research, but at the last part of the movie, it says he mentions J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and several other banks. Why specific to that bank? Like do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think he found that they were particularly more corrupt than others and had more holdings in a lot of things and they did more disaster than others. But, you know, especially Bank of America and
Bank of America.
They're turning into
Call
the
that
usual
shitty
suspects
bank.
nowadays.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, that was what,
Use it as a
2008.
symbol? Is that
You look
how
at
I
it
should
now
understand it?
oh, with banking,
Yes.
that he talked about the banking system.
I mean, he mentioned
Like the
several
particular bank.
banks.
Yeah, I
And I
think
was
it,
wondering why not.
well, I'd only be projecting, I'd have to ask him, but those particular banks were such
He
big
was
cultural.
why PJ selected particular banks.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, because he could have just mentioned banks.
yeah,
All right.
I don't know.
When we went to
particular.
war, there was a bank in America very successful called the Bank of Italy.
Mhm.
And when we went to war with Italy, they changed the name to Bank of America. Good idea, isn't it? Okay. That was the Bank of America. We used to be the Bank of Italy. So the United Bank of Christ would get a lot of people to put their money in that bank because they feel they'd be less corrupt. But if you can name a bank, the People's Bank that care for people, you know. That's what people say. "Yeah, what's your sign?" And some people say to me, "When were you born?" I say, "February the 8th, of course. You're this or that." And they go on and tell me why. I said I was wrong. It's June the 3rd. Oh, of course. They should be able to tell you when you were born by your values. It should work the opposite way too. That is in aviation, social change. Well, they say you were born in May, if it's a science. It should work both ways. But every time I give them a wrong date, they proceed to tell me, of course, you were born that way. You know.
Chuck, I know you've covered this a number of times, but since like the day I saw Zeitgeist Addendum, I've been pretty much talking to everybody, my family, my friends, any stranger that I can get to listen to me about the Venus Project. And I always get two questions, and you've covered this already, but just kind of like an expansion. The one kind of is, we'll never be alive to see this. That's one. Number two is, what about the holdouts? Now you've covered this, the holdouts, like, okay, I know the idea.
Won't join us.
Yeah, well, I mean, but a little bit deeper is the idea of the resource-based economy. Step one is to take an inventory, and in that inventory, we might find certain areas that have a very needed resource. And I know a bunch of supposing, but suppose there's a group that is on that resource that are holdouts. And many people say, oh, well, it will definitely turn to violence. It always turns to violence about the scarcity thing. How do I answer that?
Well, you know, Dubai, 10 years ago was a desert. Now it's a big city. And they're being bailed out by Saudi Arabia. See, the trouble is now all over the world, Greece, France, they're having trouble all over England, and it's getting worse in America. So it doesn't seem to be, well, this area seems to be doing all right, but they have their turn. It's just going to happen here too. And China is not exporting as much as it did. And so it's going to affect all the nations. Now's the best time for introducing that. If it gets terrible, it's going to be more difficult. The transition will be more difficult.
Let's say there's like, I don't know, some indigenous Amazon Indian tribe that won't leave their
We don't
area.
go to them
But
until
what if they have a certain resource that is needed?
Well, we would go over and say to them, what is your complaint? What do you need? And they say, well, there was bad hunting. We'd show them and give them things like a cell phone. They'd appreciate that, by the way.
Again, but like
And
that's
we'd give them whatever they need to make life better. and then ask them if they want to join with us on everything. They'll say no. But their kids, in order to maintain the cell phones, would have to study electronics.
Okay, so time and patience.
And yes, we don't kill people. We know that it takes time, and that whatever time it takes, but there'll be people in society, like the advertising people, that understand the grammar of motives, and they will advise us in different areas of better approaches. More work will be done in the study of transition, how to transition people with the minimum pain. And if he comes up with a wrong idea, it won't work. If he comes with the right idea, it'll work. What determines which direction we take is how well the system works, not Fresco's ideas. Fresco may be obsolete in 2 weeks from now. And if somebody comes up with something better than nanotechnology, geez, a lot of things will be wiped out. Today you can be wiped out very fast by innovation. And if a country doesn't spend money on innovation, they will be bypassed by those that do.
The second part of the question you answered great. The first part of the question again was many people, and I heard this after the Tokyo lecture, well, we'll never see this. And the way I answer it generally is, you know, people these days, we think of the future in an 80-year lifespan. The future is just 80 years from now, or whatever my lifespan will be. And I said, you know, in science fiction novels like, I don't know, the Dune series or whatever, people say, oh, he's from Arrakis, he's an Arakan, or he's a Martian, or a Venetian, you know, and that's how people, but we don't do that. I'm a university teacher, and I'll ask my students, are you Japanese or are you an Earthling? And 99.9% say, guess, Japanese. We don't look at ourselves that way, and so we don't look at our future that way. How can we get people to do that? To look to look further into the future as, I mean, and sometimes I'll say, well, you know, Jacques 94 years old, you know, and he inspires me just because of that. Well, I don't know, I mean, we have our hopes, but, you know, that's generally how I answered it. The other day I was listening to Peter Joseph's last radio thing, and he made the metaphor of the cathedrals, that generations created cathedrals, and the first generations, they knew they'd never see it, but they felt, you know.
What I usually say to that is that every new idea was always met with that objection. They always say it would never happen. You know, anything, the gas light, the computer, and I always say that, well, I'm really glad that the people who invented all these things didn't think that way, because then you wouldn't be enjoying your cell phone, you wouldn't be enjoying your computer, you wouldn't have electricity, you know, so those people will be bypassed in the future.
In some weird psychological way, I think it actually, the attractiveness of the Venus Project might actually turn people off, because they're like, this is great, I'll never see it.
Maybe if maybe if it was approached in a more personal way, like if you said, well, you might, maybe you will, or maybe you won't see it, but what about your children or your grandchildren?
That's
what about your
generally how
family? You know, and try to make it, you know, to where, because people are not going to react to something usually, at least now, unless usually they have some kind of personal gain from it. So that means that, you know, you have to give it to them and say, well, you are going to gain from this because of this. Now, if you don't, then your kids will, or your grandkids will. Maybe.
Jacques had a couple little skits that you were going to use in the beginning of your film to do away with not in our dayers. Can you go over those little skits? Those are good.
Our film has two farmers walking down the road to the country scene.
Country farmers.
And one of them says to the other, you hear about them Wright brothers? No, what about them? They're trying to build a flying machine. And you hear that cackle. He ain't never going to fly. If the good Lord wanted man to fly, he'd have been born with wings. He spits. You know, and that's a cinch the deal when you spit. And then the right biplane goes putting over. Slow, put, in the film. And the guy, and false teeth drop down. That's just for humor. He says, I've changed my mind. He didn't change his mind. He was changed by events.